Hey guys, it's me, EODGamer here, and we're back with another build guide video, and today we have Sampo Kit. He's the best in slot DOT buffing character because he's the only one in the game right now. Not many people know how to build this character, not very simple to play as well, DOT as a team in general, but don't worry, we'll be covering that in this video and I'll also be talking about his Eidolons, Relics, Lightcones and teams as well, tons to cover. But now let's jump in first with what he does and let's take a look at some action. So his whole kit, Sampo Kit, basically revolves around proccing wind shear on the enemies. If we just go in right here into the screen here, his skill procs is Ricochet Love is like a bouncing boomerang that hits different units. One thing to know is it can be AoE, it can be single target, it will just bounce the maximum times that is allocated. It can be increased with some Eidolons as well. His ultimate ability increases the amount of DOT done by the enemy, taken by the enemies, and his talent ability here has a chance of proccing wind shear every time he does damage. So if you look at his multipliers, a lot of people are saying it's so small, he must be such a lousy character, but it's not true because it's small because it procs many times, which means that you have a much higher chance of proccing this base chance of inflicting wind shear, and it also stacks up to 5 times, and if you add it all, it's a significant amount of damage. As you can see, I'm only like level 4, but if you have a 5 times stack, that's already a more than 100% multiplier of his attack. So let's go ahead and take a look at the bouncing skill in action, and then we will use his ultimate back-to-back as well. So you can select the primary target you want the boomerang to land on. So I'm going to just force it to land on this right side one and you can just see the bounce. I'm going to just put it in a normal mode. It's going to feel like slow-mo. Okay, so you can see here some of them have the wind shear debuff inflicted on them. Of course, there's some effect resistance if you saw. But now let's go ahead and just go into Sampo's ultimate ability.
To betray my customers, I charge extra.
So you can see here he has now a DOT vulnerability based on his ultimate ability, but at the same time we also managed to stack more wind shear on this enemy target as well. And his whole kit really revolves around this stacking of wind shear debuff. And one thing to note is that DOT doesn't crit, so this means it's going to affect his kit. You want to scale more into like attack, you want to scale more into effect hit rate as well, because it's like only a 65% chance multiplier, base chance multiplier for him to proc wind shear as well. So my Sampo is not super well invested. I'll be building him up and doing more showcase videos, but this video is primarily meant as a build guide video. Out of all of his abilities, they all matter because he stacks debuff on enemies and deals a lot of damage. He does basic attack and use skill from time to time, but more so he will want to proc this skill Ricochet Love so he can keep the uptime on the wind shear on enemies as well. If they already have max stacks, then maybe he can basic attack. Generally he wants to build all of them. I'll prioritize skill here. I'll prioritize talents and ultimate ability as well, because ultimate ability does give you a bit of this DOT damage increase. If you're building him like purely for support and you maybe are lacking a resource, you can pump the ultimate ability up first. Maybe if you're running him with Kafka and you want to just buff Kafka as a spot, those are some interesting things to consider. Other than that, his major traces are all pretty solid. It extends the duration of wind shear by 1 turn, so they take more damage in totality as well. And also, when you use your ultimate, you get a bit more refund back too. For those of you who don't know, his ultimate cost is 120, so this is almost a nice 8% refund for his ultimate. Pretty nice. This one is pretty interesting. Spice up. Enemies that are inflicted by wind shear will deal less damage to Sampo. It does form some interesting team compositions. It also makes him more chunky as a character. You're able to play maybe without a dedicated shielder with, for example, Day 1 of My New Life, because he takes less damage on his own. So very versatile as well. Other than that, most of his other kit is just survivability as well as some attack bonuses here, effect rest here, effect hit rate, which is all basically what he requires. Doesn't need crit in his kit at all, because he mainly focuses on DOT in his overall kit. So very nice balance if you perhaps want to build other characters for crit and give all your like excess non-crit gear to him, works pretty well too. Eidolons. In terms of his Eidolons, he scales very well with Eidolons all the way up to E6. His first skill here just lets him proc that Ricochet Love, the boomerang skill, 1 more time. So it's like I think 5 times in total. The E2, Infectious Enthusiasm, when you defeat an enemy with wind shear, it has 100% to like spread their wind shear to all the enemies as well, equivalent to the same talent of course. It doesn't like level it up or anything. E4, when you hit an enemy with 5 stacks or more, you immediately will proc 8% of the current wind shear damage. This allows you to like do more damage on the target as well, so it's tremendous value too. E6 I think is probably his best Eidolon, where you have wind shears multiply increased by 15%. He scales very nicely all the way up to E6 and is also a very strong damaging character too for a DOT specialist. Optimal Lightcones. There are many Lightcones that Nihility characters can use. The first one, of course, is if you just want to use them a generalistic buffer for the team, you can use Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat Lucas Lightcone, where you decrease enemies' defense by 12%. A very generalistic Lightcone, but if you want him to be built maybe for more damage, you could use his signature Lightcone here, Eyes of Prey, which increases DOT by 24%. Benefits characters who mainly do damage from damage over time rather than primary damage as well, since here is everything he needs, like effect hit rate, DOT. If you don't want this or you don't have this as well, you can use the free-to-play Lightcone. You can get this from the Memory of Chaos shop, if I'm not wrong. And you can get Fermata, increases break effect damage dealt by the wearer by 16%. But not only that, you also increase the damage dealt to enemies inflicted by shock or wind shear by 16%. This also applies to DOT. They're very good if, for example, maybe you're playing like multiple characters, or maybe you're playing Kafka, Sampo, both with shock and wind shear. This you'll be able to proc it quite often, since they most likely will be inflicted by either one of these most of the time as well. So those are some things to consider. Other than that, I think the free event Lightcone from 1.1, this increases the effect hit rate pretty strong as well, but you do need someone to proc this defense, reducing the enemies in order to get this full effect of getting more energy back too. So this is also pretty good if you just need that additional effect hit rate. Maybe you just find that his wind shear is not proccing enough, but I don't think it's going to be as good as like maybe building him a bit more for damage with Eyes of Prey as well as Fermata. Good Night Sleep Well is so-so. I think it's decent if you don't have a better choice as well. Every debuff the enemy has, you basically have a damage dealt increase. Also applies to DOT. This is going to be very strong if you can have like multiple debuffs. It's 36% DOT damage increase, which is going to be slightly higher than, for example, this self-confidence Eyes of Prey buff, which is 24%. But one thing to note that Sampo does require and does want this effect hit rate, because his ability of proccing wind shear is only 65% base chance. Having extra effect hit rate does make it more reliable for him to proc his wind shear in the first place. So don't just see it as like, oh, one is 36%, one is 24%, so this one is better. Not really true if you think about his kit, take his kit into perspective. The next 4-star Lightcone is We Will Meet Again. This is a Battle Pass Lightcone, and when they attack, use a skill, you deal additional damage to a random target. This is not too bad if you find that you have enough of like effect hit rate and all the other stuff already. It just deals additional damage since he does scale off pretty okay with attack. He doesn't have crit though, so that's something to consider as well. I would say that there are maybe better characters that can use this. He prefers maybe a bit more effect hit rate for the most part. 5-star Lightcone. Let's talk about the free-to-play, or it's free-to-play because you can pick it up from the shop eventually, but not everyone will have it. In the name of the world, well, it's 5-star Lightcone. Increases the damage done to debuff enemies by 24% when the wearer uses their skill, and effect hit rate for this attack is increased by 18%, and attack is increased by 24%. It's very nice because when he uses his skill, which is where Sampo's most of his proccing of wind shear comes from, his effect hit rate will be increased, and also his attack is also increased for that particular instance, letting his wind shear do a lot more damage. I don't think this is going to be very good for him. I'm not too sure exactly if this damage here, 24%, applies to that wind shear passive. I'll have to test it out once I get this Lightcone. I currently don't have this Lightcone on my account as well. So if any of you know, and maybe you have this Lightcone and you have your Sampo, leave us in the comments below. Yeah, I think it'll be very useful for us to know more in depth. But definitely, even if it does improve the ability, I think there are better users of this Lightcone. Sampo will be much better off with the 4-star options that are available, since they do give quite a lot for the efficiency that it is. Last but not least, let's talk about Incessant Rain. This is Silverwolf's limited Lightcone. Basically it's very strong. It gives him the effect hit rate that he wants, 24%, and also when the wearer uses their basic attack skill ultimate, which Sampo uses quite often, you have this Aether Code that increases the damage taken by the target by 12%, making him like a pseudo buffer as well, with 5-star stats, so you are able to like proc more damage from the wind shear that scales off his attack. He doesn't really care too much about crit rate, but it's nice to have when he has like doing his base wind shear attacks. Nice to have some crits here and there, but I wouldn't say it's like a huge deal. So yeah, those are some optimal Lightcones. Now let's go ahead into the optimal Relics. Sampo is quite a tricky character to build Relics for the 4-piece, because he can be played in multiple roles. I want to talk about maybe the most generalistic one, first, and that will be, for example, the Musketeer of Wild Wheat. This one is a pretty generalistic set. He has a good amounts of speed increase, good amounts of attack increase that he scales off with as well. Wind damage is also pretty nice to increase the amount of wind damage he does from his abilities too. These two are probably going to be the most common alternatives for most Sampos if they want to like maximize the amount of damage output they can do. For Thief or Shooting Meteor is another option that you can do if you want. He's your only wind DPS in your team maybe, and he's the one doing a lot of break effect. This is another option that you can consider, because when you inflict weakness break on enemy, you also regenerate a bit more energy for him. He has a 120 burst cost, so it definitely helps him quite a bit. The last one, which I think is pretty interesting, not many people might consider, will be Guard of Wuthering Snow. This is more of like a tank Sampo build, which I'll be showcasing more in like future videos as well. Because when he has Wind Shear applied on the target, one of his major traces gives him damage reduction, or the enemy's damage to him is lowered, making him ideal for maybe a Mark 7 and Sampo combo. This set will work really nicely then to make him a bit more sustained in that particular team composition too, to be not so reliant maybe on a shielder for the team composition. So those are some options. Planar Ornament is where it's a little bit more straightforward. I think his best in slot likely will be Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise. Why is that the case? It gives him effect hit rate which he needs. He has very low multipliers on his Wind Shear from his talent abilities, like 65% base chance. So having more effect hit rate allows him to land those Wind Shear and stack up to the max stacks quicker. And at the same time, that effect hit rate is converted over to attack percentage as well. So you get a double benefit in terms of not only do you get more effect hit rate, you also get attack which he scales off with as well. Unlike other characters who scale off with like crit, he doesn't really care too much about crit since his absolute damage is not as significant as like compared to the DOT from his kit. You could play him for maybe an attack buffer like Fleet of the Ageless if you want him to be a bit more tanky kind of build, where you have his HP higher, buff his whole attack of the whole team as well. This is something to consider. Space Sealing Station is also pretty good because it gives him additional attack, and when his speed is above 120, he also gets even more attack in his kit too. If you want to run like a brick Sampo build, Talia Kingdom of Banditry is okay to have. 16% with speed 145 and higher, it gets extra 20%. But overall, I think the best in slot will be Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise, and let's go ahead and check out the main stats. So for me personally, I'm running a 4-piece Musketeer of Wild Wheat and I'm running Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise. I'm going to be telling you like the main stats of what I think is going to be better. I don't have all of them on him yet, but I'll be definitely recommending you what I think will be the better alternatives. For the main stat for the body, I think that I would focus either on attack percentage or you want to focus on effect hit rate. I would likely favor effect hit rate a bit more than attack percentage, but it's a little bit harder to get. If you can find an effect hit rate main stat is likely going to outperform, you want to go for that as well. For the boots, I would likely recommend speed, because if you have more speed on Sampo, he gets more energy restoration. Because he acts more, can deal more damage, keep the Wind Shear up on the enemy targets as well, and has some refund for his burst to keep his ultimate DOT buffing uptime higher if you're running him more as a support. You could run attack percentage if you wanted to, but I won't really recommend it. He doesn't really move like tremendously fast as well. And as for the Planisphere, there are two options you can take. One is wind damage bonus, which I'm using here. Another one will be attack percentage. I'll be doing more comparison videos as well to see what is the exact difference when I get these up to a certain level, but know that these two are your options that you can take depending on what you want to focus on. And the Link Rope, you can focus on attack percentage or energy restoration rate. I personally prefer attack percentage a bit more because he doesn't really have much attack percentage in terms if you're already like running effect hit rate, you're running like speed, and you don't want to run like a dedicated attack buffer. I think attack percentage for the Link Rope is pretty good. If you do find him maybe lacking of energy restoration, you could have energy regeneration rate here and find the attack percentage maybe in substats and stuff like that. One good thing about this character is he doesn't need to bail for crit damage at all. You can ignore those two options, which means it becomes very efficient for your overall account, because your crit is likely going to be very well desired for a lot of other characters. For example, you have DPSs like Zila, you have DPSs like Xingyuan and stuff like that. So very nice balance to the overall account. Now let's go ahead and look into his optimal team compositions. So Sampo's team composition, I think the first team that I want to point out here that is going to be pretty good for him is going to be a character, for example, like, where is he? Alright, she's here. Hook and Sampo will work really well together. Both of them have some sort of sustain in their kit. Hook has good amounts of burn in her kit DOT as well, so she benefits from him. he can play both in AoE and single target. Hook is a single target damage dealer, but also has some sort of AoE with her enhanced basic attacks, although I would say like more so single target. This allows you to, for example, run a character like Asta in this slot over here, which buffs speed, which both of them requires, attack, which both of them likes as well, fire damage bonus for Hook too. So this will be like a 4-star team that is pretty solid. The last one, definitely you want a pretty good sustain, for example like Natasha here. The downside with running Natasha is you actually want to have good amounts of sustain from these 3 characters. Sampo has some damage reduction in his kit, Hook has some like sustain in her kit as well. Asta is the squishy one and always gets targeted, so that's something you want to know. You could run a character like Japat here too, which will solve a lot of that, especially in higher levels of investment. But for the most part, I think a lot of you might be more interested in with like, for example, a Kafka and Sampo team. And I'm just going to use Serval here as like a proxy for Kafka. You could run Serval here too. She does proc quite a bit of shock in the kit. You could run Serval, Sampo. She does a lot of AoE. He does good amounts of AoE. Single target works for him as well. And in this, you can run like just a traditional, for example, where is my Natasha? You can run Natasha here. And you could even run, for example, like a Fire MC here in the last slot. And this team will work pretty nicely for a 4-star team. You can replace this with Kafka and it will work pretty nicely for a Kafka DOT team, especially if you don't really have too much sustain units as well. So those things are some things to consider. You can check out this like Kafka video if you're more interested in more Kafka team comps. I'll be doing a dedicated one for Sampo, which I'll link in the video card here once it's completed, where I go through like all permutations and combinations too. And thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, do like and subscribe for more such future content. And see you in the next video.